Hello again. I'm Derek Taylor. I go by Galdoc online. And the presentation is pretty much what it says right here. It says using Adobe After Effects to create 2D animations for whatever. I kind of imagine that you're going to be doing stuff with a pixel art sort of style. The one I went with, where I focused most of my energies, was Doom. Because, well, as it turns out, I am a Doom fan. Pretty much all old school FPS games like Duke Nukem 3D, Hexen, Heretic, all that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, by day I am a parent, as you can probably hear in the background. My kids and wife are all talking, so if I get interrupted, you'll hopefully understand why. But yeah, normally I am a math teacher and a YouTuber, so I do a whole bunch of that stuff. But by night, I am someone who just has way too many hobbies. Almost all of them are game design related in some sense. Why should you listen to me? So I've used After Effects a lot to make animations for a Doom mod called Project Brutality. I'll give a little bit of a background on that briefly, but it's I want to focus more on the actual content of this thing. But essentially, I have the thing here is that if you're using After Effects for this kind of a task, it's kind of like driving a semi truck to get a chili dog from 7-Eleven. Yes, it will get you there, but it is absolutely overkill for the task at hand. And in this particular case, I think it actually has a lot of benefits, but they're not exactly obvious. So I've used After Effects to what it's actually intended for. I've made educational videos, logo reveals, and all sorts of different little tiny projects here or there. So I'm pretty familiar with the tool. I've done this for a few years. I'm fairly experienced, but I am still learning new things. And honestly, I self-taught most of my skill here to myself. Like it was basically just watching various tutorials online. So if I can do this, then you can too. That is for darn sure. So with that said, what should you know coming into this already? The glowing rectangle in front of you is called a monitor. Okay, in all seriousness, you don't have to know anything. I'm starting at 0 here. I expect you to literally know just about that you have a computer and how to use a mouse and a keyboard. Other than that, there's not much to really know here. The thing is that if you do know certain things, then that's better, obviously, if you know about animation, or if you've already used After Effects, that's fine, but not necessary. What tools we will be using here. So I'm primarily going to be in After Effects. If you want to do this, you can as well. But there is possibly a free alternative in Blender. I'm not as familiar as I should be with Blender. I'm learning more about it. But it turns out it actually can do a whole lot of the kinds of things I'm talking about here. But I'm not familiar enough with its workflow to be able to speak cognizantly on it. So it's something that I'm going to be picking up in the future, and you might see on my my YouTube channel some kind of tutorials on that someday, but not yet. The other thing you're going to be needing is any image editor capable of working at the pixel level. What that primarily means is that it could be Krita, whatever you want to say that, Sprite, it could be Photoshop, it could be anything. And yes, I understand that I misspelled Sprite right here. It's actually, I think it makes it funnier. So I promise that's how that works. Okay. So what is After Effects? It is a layer-based compositing software. Right. So what that means is not something you need to worry about right now. I'll touch on that when we get in the actual program. But essentially, the notion is that you're making special effects for particular clips in film. So it's when you add in like the little glowy hologram thing floating above the wristwatch of Tony Stark or something along those lines. So that's the kind of thing it does. It is completely overkill for this use, as I said earlier, but it makes it very efficient and actually opens up a couple of really interesting opportunities. What we're going to do is we are going to take this batch of images here, which was provided to me by someone named Carrot. He basically is one of the spriters on the Project Brutality team, and we're going to make an animation with it. So yeah, it's a rocket launcher animation. It's for a mod called Project Brutality for Doom. Okay, so this is where I was going to give you the little history. Basically, 1993, id Software releases Doom, becomes very popular, creates an entire genre. Not creates, I mean, I suppose Wolfenstein 3D did that. But either way, it really pioneers the notion that, hey, look, FPS kind of games are really, really amazing. Eventually, they released the source code that got picked up by people. And over the course of a couple of different cycles, it got turned into a different engine, ZDoom, and then GZDoom, and there's even branches from there. And then once those were created, there were a whole bunch of people who decided to make really awesome mods for it. One of those was called Project Brutality. Sorry, Brutal Doom. And then someone took that and turned. We sort of extended from that into Project Brutality. None of that is super duper important, but suffice it to say that what I'm really trying to get the idea here is that there has been a long history of people sort of working for free, basically, to create a whole lot of really interesting stuff for this really old game. So I personally find that really, really fascinating. And it's part of what attracted me to the project in the first place. So we're also going to be learning a few basics of animation, and we're going to learn the basic layout of After Effects. Now, this is a tool that's meant to be used by professionals, and there is absolutely no way I could teach you all that what you would need to know to take this into the workforce in just 1 hour or however long it's going to end up being. But I can give you something to start with, and more importantly, I can show you some of the pitfalls that crop up as you do pixel art, specifically with After Effects. So yeah, I want you to. I'm going to try to outline a workflow for rapid and accurate creation. All right. So as I said, we're always starting with these sprites here. Let's head over to AE. Derek, click on the AE button. Continue presentation. To move the slides so you don't look silly in front. Oh, right. Okay. So let's go ahead and hop on over. So this is After Effects. Welcome. Before I go into too much detail on what these things are, I'm going to show you the keystroke that is going to be something I'm not going to say I'm doing, but it's going to be something that's going very quickly. It's me pressing the tilde key. There are these different panes here, and you can see them outlined in blue. And whatever one I'm hovering over, if I press the tilde key, it'll maximize. Blender has this. I think Unity has one. It's like Shift Enter or Spacebar, something along those lines. Also, if you do know Unity, I'm going to make a couple of comparisons to Unity here. If you don't know Unity, don't worry about it. You don't need it. I'm going to be describing these things from ground zero either way. So, okay, with that, let's talk about the first couple of panes we need to know. This is the project pane. It has all of your assets in it. It's essentially, like in Unity, your assets window. For me, I've got a whole bunch of compositions, which I'll talk about in a second here. And I've also got what I call pieces, but these are essentially image files that you can kind of see the little preview up here. They're just fragments of this entire image, which is in itself its own animation. The composition, this is right here, the composition window. This is just whatever the animation is going to be looking like whenever it actually runs through the playhead. And then this down here is the timeline. And if you want it to actually show, you just hit the spacebar and then it will play. So simple as that. Now, and there's a couple of other things. On the side here, we have the effects and presets window. I do not want you to worry too much about this right now. This right here, paired with this window, which is the effects controls, essentially, whenever you put a special effect on your layer, excuse me, whichever layer down here is selected, it's going to show all of its properties here that you can manipulate. You should not sit here and be like, oh, I've got to learn all those, because my suggestion to you here is if you're going to do this, pick a need, like wait till you have a need to do a particular thing, and then start digging through the effects and presets, because this is an overwhelmingly large list. It's a very handy search at the very top, but it's a huge list, and there's no way to, it would just stifle progress to sit here and try to learn them all. So don't worry about that. The last thing is Keyframe Wingman. This is an add-on for Adobe After Effects. Excuse me. It's an add-on for Adobe After Effects. I will have a link on my final slide where you can pick that up. What it does, you just put a pin in that. We're going to come back to it because I'll show it a little bit later on. But yeah, that's basically what we're looking at here. Now, I mentioned this was a layer-based compositing software, and you can kind of see the layers here. If you've ever used Photoshop or any other sort of image program wherein they have layers, you essentially know what this is. Each layer is it's like a transparency on which you've drawn something, and then you stack them on top of each other. The ones that are on top get drawn last, so it can potentially cover up things underneath it, which is a good thing. And what we are going to do is with this timeline here, we are going to take various properties of these and we are going to animate them over time. And that's really the power of what After Effects offers you, is the ability to change those properties over time. So let's talk a little bit about how that works. Um, First, let's just look at a couple of animations, and I can sort of walk you through it. So here's an animation that we're going to be working on. It's an unloading animation. Doom Guy, which is the guy with the hand here, is the main character. He essentially is just unloading his little weapon there, and fine. So easy enough. As you've probably noticed, actually, I did this a little out of order. If you've ever played the original Doom, I actually have it pulled up here. It is a lot clunkier. When I say a lot clunkier, I mean, I'll show you in just a quick second here. It's actually funny on a however many year old game, 20 some odd year old game that took up no space whatsoever, like a couple of floppy disks. They've now added on all of these animations and stuff. And so when you go to download it, it's actually a pretty sizable thing. And of course, it connects to Bethesda.net. So that's great. But originally in Doom, this is sort of what it would look like. Oh, come on. Clicking. All right. So let's go in here. We're going to just hit a new game. Doesn't matter what. So let's go ahead. For those of you who are not a huge fan of violence, I'm not going to be showing too much. It's old. This is pretty edgy back in 1993, but these days it's hopefully not that bad. But anyways, so we're going to give everything. Here is what a weapon would look like back in the day. So we're talking just a couple of frames of animation here. What you would have to do with this kind of animation is essentially stop frame animation. Each one of those frames was an actual image that needed to be made, whether from photographs or from taking a pixel editor and actually making that particular image and then just playing them in quick succession. As you can tell, though, it's a very sort of slow, I mean, it's slow, it's very choppy animation. What we're going to be doing, let's get out of here. What we're going to be doing is instead of doing that sort of choppy animation, we're going to be taking properties and having them move around. So you'll notice that when the gun moves here, it's actually sliding. The image itself is being moved, and it's creating instead of having to go through and make brand new images by hand or with photographs, it's actually just moving it around. Very handy. And with this sort of idea, you actually do bring out other things too. Like I actually am putting in other pieces of art. There's a piece of art with that rocket in it. There's a piece of art with these little notches here. If you go here, there's a piece of art with the little ignition. So it's not that you don't have to make any art, but it's not as much, and you can get a whole lot of mileage out of just a couple of images. And with it, you can do stuff like this. This is loading 3 little rounds in there. So that's sort of the overall idea. You can also do little fun like this, grab the rocket out of there. Okay. So the thought is that we're going to come in here and we're going to take a look. Oh, and by the way, I just wanted to say this once really quick. If you have questions, I do have the chat open on the side, so please feel free to ask. I am not one of those people who just wants to sit here and talk. If you guys have something to ask, please let me know. I will do my best to answer. So what we're going to do is we are going to essentially redo this animation here. We're going to try to build it in some way. And in doing so, we're going to learn all about the sort of sliding animation and how to make it move around, like I was saying. So let's go in here. This is under blue. I'm going to take this and I'm going to hit Control D, which duplicates. Different programs have different duplicate keystrokes. It's nothing new. We're just going to rename this. Actually, we'll just leave it as 2. Doesn't matter. We're going to open up this composition. And here you have all the layers again. But what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to take a look at what are called the keyframes. It's going to give us our starting point. I'm going to get rid of all this stuff that's unnecessary to this. What is a keyframe? Well, that is really the crux of how to do this particular type of animation. So as I showed you earlier with the shotgun, it was a whole bunch of images that were simply played really quickly-ish next to each other to sort of create the idea of motion. What we're going to do here is we're going to say instead, this layer right here, for example, if I were to bring down all the properties I can edit in it in its transform, which is essentially the same idea as it is in Unity. It's a transform node. You can then change the opacity, which is its transparency, the rotation, scale, position. I can't click. and the anchor point. The anchor point is this thing right here, and it's the point about which the whole thing both rotates and is scaled. So if it shrinks in like here, it's going to shrink on in on that point. I'm using Control Z to undo, same in most programs. And so what I did was I said, okay, fine. The position is here. What I could have done, and this is what happens in many different basic animation packages, is you sit here and you stamp down the animation and you move it a little bit. Maybe you rotate it a little bit if you're going to do that, like if it's a thing on Photoshop or something. And you move down here. There we go. Oh, by the way, fun little trick, actually. I'm going to be putting in a whole bunch of these little nuggets throughout the presentation. Notice how when I tilted it, you got this gap of pixels under here. It's actually really obvious here, but in certain pieces of animation, it can actually be a lot less obvious. So what I suggest doing is creating a layer underneath that's just a solid color, and it becomes a lot easier to see. And then you can simply turn that layer on and off by clicking the little I button there. Very handy. But anyway, so you come in here and you would move it around, and each time this thing goes forward one frame, you would just change its position, and you kind of hope for the best, right? Well, that is a possible way of doing this, and in fact, this is what happened a lot of the time, even in modern day sort of Doom animations. I'm undoing a whole lot, so forgive me. What we do here is what's called tweening. Okay, so what this keyframe does is it says start at this point and then end at this new point. And if you look at the actual value here, it's whatever is that 188 something, and then it was 215 here. Those values are changing as it goes along here. And so that's what these keyframes are. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to build up this animation essentially with these keyframes here. In particular, we're going to be working on that magazine because that magazine, doing that magazine and doing the hand is probably about what I can fit into the allotted time I've got here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the very beginning and we're going to delete the keyframes for the magazines. Here we go. I got two of them here and you'll see why in a little bit. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to unparent them. So I'm basically resetting the parameters of this so that we can actually do this animation. And we're going to go ahead and just get rid of this. There, boom. Okay. So now what we have is the animation. It looks all weird now. Looks all kind of broken and everything. So in fact, let's go ahead and delete out that hand and this one here. Okay. And in fact, you know what? Let's just start from scratch. We're just going to absolutely, we're going from nothing here. So now we only have these keyframes, get rid of those. All right, so now nothing's happening. This thing is now a static image. I'm going to press X to set it back to this. That is a personal keystroke. Basically, it says set the view to 100%. And I can tell you, if you just set a keystroke for that, it'll make your life go so much faster, or go so much better, and you'll work so much faster in After Effects. So a little nugget there. But yeah, so it's a still animation, nothing's happening. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to start animating this so it can actually be moved. Now, in doing so, we're going to learn a couple of things. First, so let's grab the idle frame here. Now, this idle frame has everything parented to it. If you're wondering what I mean, right now, if I were to I unparented these magazine layers for a reason so that could illustrate the idea. Right here, this list here, each one of these things says what layer is its parent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to move this off to the side. And as you saw earlier, the magazine did not come along for the ride. Yes, this will be available later, I think. It should be on the YouTube channel for ROZ. So yeah, this did not come along for the ride, and that's clearly not what we want to have happen, right? What we want is for what you've noticed here is that there's all these layers here, but it looks like a single thing. And what I've done is I've parented them all. So let's go ahead and take these and we're going to parent them to here. And now when I do that, anytime this thing moves, they will move in sympathy. Well, now this is an interesting question. What are all these layers? So earlier I said that you were going to be using a pixel editor, and that pixel editor in this case is Photoshop. Now, it doesn't look like much, but essentially I've got a bunch of folders here, and I don't know if I beat this drum earlier, but you really, really want to stay organized. You'll notice that here I have everything very neatly organized into folders. That is a good idea, especially if you're going to be working cross programs like this. But basically, what I did was I went in here and I took the original frame here, right? This is just a single layer, and I chopped it up into a bunch of pieces. If you come in here and look, you've got, here, let me turn this off. I got a piece here for that little vent. I've got a little stack. I just called it the pancakes. I had no idea what it was called. This little piece here, and then I came in and I have some piece here for the middle, and then I've got something here in the near chunk, and then I come in here and I've got all these different pieces. I don't need to go through all of them, but essentially, what you can sort of take away from this is that I've gotten all of these things broken up so that each piece can move individually here. And if you do this just as a sidebar, you can actually get a pretty cool sort of pseudo 3D look here. So if I come down here to, for example, the mode swap, right? Actually, let's not do that one. Let's do the one that's where it's loaded. Here we go. You can get this really cool sort of pseudo 3D look. So I've taken this, and because I broke it up and changed the way that things were parented very cleverly, I essentially made it look like so that it's sort of scrunched up and you get a quick 3D look. The thing is that happens so quickly that there are inconsistencies and there's little errors, but you don't notice them, not easily. I suppose if you play the game a ton, you'll notice them, but then it just becomes sort of the character of it. So there's another little tidbit. You're wanting to focus more on the character of these things and trying to get it to look good enough without having to worry about every single little detail. Because when you're doing something along those lines, you are doing an approximation, and there is the law of diminishing returns. It will not. It's not going to ever look perfect if you're doing that sort of thing. By the way, I do the pseudo 3D way too often. yes, I do. Okay, so moving on, what we're going to do is so I took all those layers, I brought them in, and what we're going to do is we're going to actually move them around some. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to throw down, let's say, a keyframe on the position, right? And what a keyframe is, it's basically saying at this time, whatever image it is or whatever it is going to be at this location. So what I'm going to do, come in here and I'm going to add in another position keyframe. Nothing has changed, and that's because the values have not changed. However, if I were to come in here and I moved it over some like this, what you'll see is that it's here, and then it moves to here. But it's moving it smoothly. In fact, let's take a really close look here. What you can see is a whole bunch of little dots here, and each one of those little dots represents the tweening, which means in between, essentially in between these two keyframes here, where this thing is going to be at every point in between the keyframes. So it does this automatically. This is the huge power of After Effects. This is one of the things that makes it, in my opinion, one of the best tools for this job, or at least anything that has this sort of tweening type of animation effect. So it's very cool, right? You can sit here and move that point around. You can even rotate it, and it'll move. So if I come in here and I click on the rotation, and I add a keyframe there and a keyframe here, I can actually get this thing to rotate across. The reason this is so straightforward is because all it's doing is it's interpolating these values. It says at this position here, or at this keyframe here, it was that value. It's going to be this value here. There are this many keyframes in between. It just does a quick little calculation, divides it up into however many pieces, and then puts them in a line there. So pretty straightforward. And it can do that for any value. Fundamentally, this is just a number that's being sort of changed. Like this is like a knob you're turning. If you grab this and pull it, it really does feel like a knob. So it's just turning that knob for you. And you'll notice, again, we get this little problem. So almost all the time when you're doing this, you've got to come in and move it down. That's sort of the cheat. You just hide the pixels that don't work. And then you feel like you're moving too much of that magazine off, so maybe you back off the rotation, and then you can move it back up a little bit. And there's sort of an art to this, right? So there we go. We'll call that good enough. It's not perfect, but I think it's good enough. Now you'll notice that there's a little bit of smoothing here. It's a little blurry from there to there. That's due to a thing called motion blur. So basically, if I turn the motion blur off, which is this button here, you'll notice that it just basically stamps down the image every single time. But if I turn on the motion blur, it actually interpolates the pixels movement a little bit. The further it moves, like if I come in here, for example, see that blur level there, if I come over here and I move this like way over here, well, then that's much blurrier. Like this thing is smeared out across a bunch of different pixels here. So very handy if you're wanting to do this on your animations. You not only need this little thing clicked, but you also need to make sure that this toggle is set. If you look at this in After Effects and you don't see these, press F4. Um, because they basically had too many things to put on each layer, they essentially had to make two groups of it. And because it makes total sense, F4 is the one that goes in between the two. I have no idea what they were thinking. The usability of this is, anyways. So I'm not bitter, I swear. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this and we're gonna just analyze this and see what it looks like. Watch what happens here. That is not how most people move. Like I can let me stretch this out over more time, right? So we can see it happen. That's not how anyone moves. No one moves so regularly, steadily. This is a very robotic motion. And this is the first pitfall of tweening if you just do it what's called linearly. And so what we're going to do is we're going to see how we can't fix that. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called easing. You can come in here, and I'm always going to forget where it is. Animation. Um, yeah, I always forget where the thing is because you know what? I do the key binding. If you out of the box, F9 is the key you press. I've mapped it to Q because this is something you're going to want to hit a whole lot. But the thing it's doing is called easy easing. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to hit Q, and you're going to notice that these keyframes go from being diamonds to little hourglasses. Now, if you look carefully at these points here and see if you can tell what's happening. So I'm going to undo that. So this is what it looks like normally, and then I'm going to redo it. To redo is Control Shift Z. Notice these points here got more spread out in the middle and more bunched up near the ends. Well, it's a little difficult to tell what's happening, but if I come in here and I press X again, it just set the viewport to 100%. And play, you can sort of see it's a little better now. Like it's slower near the beginning, faster in the middle, and slower near the end. And if you look at the actual dots here, you can see that like it's more bunched up and slower near the end, more spread out in the middle. However, that is not a very intuitive way of interpreting that information, and so we have what's called the graph editor. So again, I would keybind this. Um, you can either click here or use the keybind, but this shows you the graph editor. And there's two different major things you're going to want to see here. One is the speed graph, which is what we've got here, and two is a value graph, which you can get by right clicking and hitting edit speed value graph. I always found this one a bit disorienting personally, particularly because I can come in here and I can click on one thing and this is not so handy. I can come in here and do stuff to it, but then I'm not doing it to this one down here, and I got to do all of these, jump through all these hoops to try to make it look natural. Instead, this is the trick, is you come in here and you go to the speed graph. What this is how fast it's moving at any given time. It says in pixels per second. So at the very beginning, it's moving at 0 pixels per second, or that is perfectly still. Move forward a little bit, and let me zoom in on this so I can get a bit more resolution. And you can see we're about, I don't know, that's 0 to 50. That's probably like 35 or something. I don't know. 37, fine. And then it's moving at 37 pixels per second. And then it's moving at about 70 pixels per second, something. And faster and faster and faster until it gets up to about right here where it's moving at this many pixels per second. Now this right here is a what they call an easy ease. It's essentially just saying be fast in the middle and slow at the ends. And with this visualization, it's actually really easy to see. But this is still not quite what I would describe as a human motion. It's close. And yes, humans can move like that, but they got to move very carefully. And we're doing an unload animation. This is Doom Guy. He's a rough and tough dude. He's like moving pretty quickly, right? He's not going to move all slow and careful. He's going to be like, I'm full of whatever. I don't know what it takes to kill demons because I don't kill demons. But, anyways, so the idea here is that we want to make this a bit more extreme. So what you can do is you can highlight this keyframe, grab the Bezier handle here, and just stretch it out. Now, the reason you can't take this Bezier handle and tilt it up and down has to do with calculus reasons, but suffice it to say that you are going to be very glad that it's horizontal the whole time. But what it means is that what you can do is pull this out, and it's going to spend a lot more time being slower down here, a lot shorter time being super fast here, and get back down to 0 pretty quickly. And if you look here, you can kind of see that reflected if you can look carefully. Oh, thank you, cat. I got a cat on the keyboard. Oh, yeah, I love you too. You go over here. You can kind of see that reflected here by the fact that it's all bunched up near the beginning. And then it gets really spread out when it's moving really fast. So this huge gap happens when the speed is peaked here, or even, I guess, a little bit further. Boom. So that's the idea behind being able to manipulate this and make it look a little more human because, well, let's take a look. So it's not perfect. You'll notice that the rotation doesn't quite keep up with it, right? So here's the issue that's happening there. Let's unclick this and go back here to the timeline. If you look at these two frames, they look like they're the exact same, right? But let's go back. Let's highlight these two things and go into the actual. Excuse me. Let's go into the actual editor again. Ah, look at this. This thing is all swooped out here. This blue one still has the old keyframe animation to it. So we've got a problem. Well, there's a couple of things we can do here. One, we can come in here and we can click on the blue thing, right? And you click on the little handle and try to drag it out and try to match it up to where the handle is here. It's kind of fidgety. You got to sit here and click on these things. You got to be really precise. Better way of doing this. Grab both of them, hit whatever your easy ease keyframe is, then just grab both at the same time, and you can move all of them at once. Okay. And now the rotation and the position move in concert, and it moves nice and smoothly. Perfect. So yeah, boom. Looking a lot better, but still not quite there. It seems to stop a little fast. You can come in here and grab these frames and do the same thing. Now, this is well and good, but this process can get a little tedious because notice how many layers I have to add keyframes to. Well, here's the thing. This keyframe wingman, which I mentioned earlier, is what's going to help us here. You see, these right here are essentially the Bezier handles I was showing you earlier. So if I come in here and grab these two properties, grab these, I can then change all of them at once here, but more importantly, I can see a number that I can then stamp down anytime I want. So I can say come in here and call that 70. 75 is the one I use pretty regularly. And so we can now have this thing move like this. Boom. And anytime I then animate something else in here, I don't have to sit here and fuss with any of these handles. I can come in here and just click this one button one time and we're all set. So very, very, very handy. If you don't want them linked, just click on that little link thing here, and then you can move them independently. I personally do not recommend doing that just because, honestly, unless you're doing something that's repeating that action, the one that you're going to be repeating most often is this. Okay, so now it's time to bring in the hand. Let's come up here, and this brings us to the next thing in Photoshop here. Doom Guy's hands. This has been over the course of time accumulated. I have this huge file here that's accumulated Doom hands. And like I said earlier, with the sort of twisty and turny journey that Doom's engine has taken throughout time, Doom Guy's hands has taken a fairly twisty, turny journey. And you can see that some of these hands make a little more sense than others. I don't know how often Doom Guy is going to be throwing, I guess, a Dragon Punch, or I guess this is like the buff one with I guess that's a broken ulna, but it's supposed to be really strong. I don't know. Some of these hands are hit or miss. Like, okay, a shield, perfect, makes total sense. But yeah, you can pretty much find a hand for just about anything. This is in the public domain, as it were, so you can just come and grab it and do whatever you want with it. This will be one of the files that I share at the very end. But if you come through here, what's that? Really quick. No, wait. Oh, okay. What? Huh? You want to say hi? You can say hi just really quick.
Hi, baby.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Yes. I'm being listened to. Oh, I see. They have me on the phone out there. So yes. So they're very fascinated by the fact that they can come talk into this microphone and then go out there and hear it. So, okay. Anyways, yeah, that arm hair, like right there. That is some arm hair right there. Anyways, so what I did was I came through here and I pulled out a couple of the hands and I essentially brought them in here. Oops, there we go. Pieces, hands. And the one we're going to be wanting for this particular operation, I tried a couple. The one that I found works best is this one, the heavy weapons grip. So what we're going to do is we're just going to come in here and actually I'm going to put it on above the magazine here because that's going to be important. You'll see why. Now, a couple of things. First off, we draw this thing in here and we notice it's a bit blurry. Like you may or may not have enough experience with this to see that blurriness, but this doesn't look very sharp to me. In fact, I see this sort of faint halo on the side, if you can see that too. It's harder to see on the, whoa, I hit spacebar, sorry. It's harder to see, oh, move out of the way. Yeah, go over there. It's harder to see on this sort of ragged edge here, but on the straight edge, it's a little easier to see that halo. The reason that's happening is because of what I call the half pixel error. Basically, the canvas size, which if I zoom out, is very specific. For my needs, it's 427 pixels by 200. Obviously, I'm just doing Doom. I don't know what your personal pixel art project is going to require, but you're going to figure that out when you go and do your tasks. So whatever you use, it's going to be that thing. And the deal is that this image right here has a certain height and a certain width. I don't know it off the top of my head. But I do know that the reason we're getting this error is because there's a disagreement between the even or oddness of the pixel width or height. In this particular case, I know that the width of my canvas is 427, which is an odd number. I see this little pixel error here, which is what happens when I then put a even numbered width image in there, which is really weird to say. It doesn't really matter what's going on unless you're curious, but the way you fix it is you come in here to the position and you just go ahead and get rid of the half pixel, or you put in 0.5, and there it just sharpened right up. So before, after, great. Second thing you'll notice is that is the wrong hand. We want him to grab the magazine, right? So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to flip it. So we're going to hit scale, and so I'm going to unlink it and then just say negative 100% in the X direction. It essentially does what we want. It's a silly workaround. I don't know why there's nothing, there's no automatic thing to doing it, but probably because they figured, you could do this. Let's relink it though, because we want to be able to scale this thing up and down as needed. So I'm actually going to scale it down just a little bit. And that does introduce a little bit of blur here again, but if I've got two sources of blur, then that's worse. So getting rid of that with a half pixel error is always a good thing. Okay, so the next problem you're going to run into if you try to do this, if you're trying to do like pixel art, in fact, let's get rid of this scale. I'm going to keep this very simple. The second thing you're going to run into is this problem of if I just click and drag this thing around the canvas, of course, I've picked a different layer. First off, you can pick different layers like that. That was random. But second, if I click on this thing and I drag it around, watch what happens. Let me zoom in here. This is especially important for every pixel artist. If I click and drag this thing, you can sort of see I'm getting that blur again. Okay. In fact, it can get so bad that you can lose a lot of detail here. And this is just, sort of an arm tone. So that's not a big deal. But if you're doing something with an icon or you're doing something with a piece of art, you really don't want this to happen. So the things that's going on here is that you're essentially getting fractional pixels here. So like if I click on this and I move it, you'll notice that if I click on the actual position, we're dealing with some kind of decimal, like this is like 0.3125 or something, right? You can, of course, come in here and just tediously get rid of it, and that'll fix that particular dimension, and then you can tediously get rid of this one. Let me tell you something. You do not want to be doing that. That does not scale well. What you would rather do is move it so that that doesn't happen, and it turns out that it's a little tedious, but the way you do it is you grab these, you hit V to make sure you're on this. You don't want the hand tool. Sometimes that'll come up because you'll hit the keystroke for it. Yay. Or maybe I'm the only one. I don't know. But either way, you're going to come in here and you're going to, like I said, these were knobs. You're going to use these like a knob. You're going to click and drag side to side. And then if you do that, it's going to move only in whole pixel increments. So that will make your life so much easier. But yeah. Now, we noticed earlier that we had a human motion here. I want to just make one more comment on that because I'm about to do a different motion in a second here. This motion right here, Doom Guy is ostensibly holding this thing, right? I'm actually going to speed it up a little bit. I like the easing, but I think it takes too long. So we're going to speed that up. All right there. So boom, just kind of quickly moves. The thing is that when you're doing a motion that a human is doing, you're going to have a slow down, a speed up, and a sort of ease in. You're going to have this. Like, let me come in here. Because this is how our muscles work, right? You can jolt your muscles and do something really, really quickly. But if you're trying to do something precise, like move a gun so that you can reload its magazine, you're going to be moving slow at first, fast in the middle, and slow in the end. Of course, you can sort of play with where that peak is and tune that to your liking. But if everything else I teach you today about animation is forgotten, remember this one thing. If everything else you forget, just remember this one thing, because this right here is going to add so much believability to your animations that I can tell you it's night and day when you actually put these things out. Now, the reason that's important is because we're about to do something similar with the heavy weapons grip hand here, because we're about to bring it into play. So let's go out here. And what we're going to do is when it gets to here, we're going to then, we're going to actually, we'll wait till about right there to start the motion. We'll add a keyframe. And right now this thing is off the, or sorry, it's right there. It's almost where we want it to be. What we can do here is one of two things. What I like to do is I like to actually place it where it's going to end up. So he's grabbing onto the magazine about right there, right? Don't have to be perfect right now. We're just trying to get through this. And what I will do is I will take that keyframe and you can just move it into the future. I can then stamp down another keyframe right where I'm at. And then I can move this off the screen. Now, this is, no, that's not how that works. What we're going to do is we're going to add in a little bit of rotation. So we're going to add a keyframe for the rotation, both beginning and end. Oops. So what I did there accidentally was I clicked on these arrows. They're very handy. These arrows move the playhead to the next keyframe in that sequence. So very, very handy. I should probably be using that more often in this talk. I'm going to take these and I'm going to use my keyframe wingman and I'm going to add the 75 on there. And we're going to talk about why that's not quite right in a second. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to, in the past keyframe here, you can kind of see it's right there. We're going to move this off to the side and we're going to rotate it. Now it's rotating about this anchor point. Normally, one of the things you would do when you bring something in is change where the anchor point is, so it's on a sensible place. But because so much of the hand is off the screen in this case, it doesn't really matter. However, just for the sake of argument, let's go ahead and duplicate this layer. Let's say that you were going to be doing something more intense with this. Just move it up. The way you do that is you're going to have to get rid of your position keyframes. There is a workaround, but the simplest way I found, let me say it that way. You get rid of your position keyframes, you click on that, and then you drag this thing down. It's a little weird. This is another gotcha. You can hold control and it will sort of snap to the edges or these little control points here. That's very handy. But yeah, you can't move it unless you click that thing. Like if you come back here, if I undo that and I click this, if I click and drag this, it's just going to move the object without moving the actual anchor point. Just a little gotcha there. All right, let's undo our way back to victory here. There we go. So now we've got this thing coming in from the side. It's got that human motion to it, but there's a problem. It's moving slow here off the screen. The thing is that realistically, it's starting its wind up way down here. So by the time the hand gets onto the screen, it actually should be moving pretty fast. This is one of those instances where you're going to come in here and take the sort of the speed peak and just bring that back here so that the slowdown and stuff that was happening off camera is happening over here. And what you start with is something that moves very fast. Now, I'm also going to drag this out a little bit more. I'm not quite happy. I think it should faster. Let's see. I'm pretty happy with it. If I were to be actually doing something for production value, I would spend some time tuning that and trying to get it perfect. And that is something that you end up doing a whole lot. Like those of you who are here who ever watch me in stream, you know that I sit here and I fuss with these knobs all day long. All right, so there's one other little detail that I wanted to add here. And that is, I probably did this a little bit out of order, so I do apologize. But you'll notice here in the actual animation, we're trying to replicate that this thing clicks out like that. And the reason it clicks out like that is because ostensibly he's hitting a button off the side or under the gun or whatever, and he's popping it out so that it can then be just grabbed. So we're going to add in that little animation because that actually illustrates another very interesting principle when it comes to motion. We've talked about this idea of slow start, slow end. We've talked about fast start, slow end. Now we're going to talk about something a little different. So we're going to come in here and we're going to hit the position and the rotation. And we're going to, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these frames, which is the hand moving, and I'm going to slide them out in time so that I give myself a little bit of runway here. And you'll notice that when I give myself too much room here, that's fine. I can always bring them back and try to fit them into the composition. So I'm going to hit these two, position and rotation. And what I'm going to do, you'll notice here that I've already done this. I've moved my anchor point where I want this thing to rotate around. I want it to rotate around this point here. So that's already set up. So what we're going to do is we're just going to move out and we're going to, again, go out here like this. And actually, I don't know that I need to have the position move. I think literally this is just a rotation keyframe. Okay, so let's do that. Now, again, this is a little mechanical. So if you were to actually watch it, it looks like this. It just sort of like mechanically raises. Personally, when I see something like that, it's if I'm going to have something that mechanical, it tends to stick out like a sore thumb. So it's got to be something very specific I'm doing here, and this isn't that. I would kind of imagine this as being spring loaded. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and again ease this thing in. Let's go ahead and hit Q key, or for you at home, it'll probably be F9. And then we're going to come in here and we're going to animate this again, moving fast. And this is sort of it slowing down. So there we go. Now, the thing is that there's this huge gap here. Again, I can just come in here, grab these frames, and sort of bring them back. And in fact, I can have this thing moving a little bit. I'm actually going to, now that I've changed the location of the magazine, it's actually really interesting to see. It's really fast to just come in here and edit this. That's one of the other beauties of After Effects, is that if you do something in the wrong order like this, fixing it is a breeze. And let me tell you, I did a work on something called a railgun. It was a very fun animation, but I had to go back a whole lot of times. It is very handy to be able to go back rapidly and change things that quickly. Here we go. I'm actually going to take all of this and bring this back in a little bit here so that while it's in those really slow moving frames, then that thing is coming up. So, and now this is going to be one of the last major tricks I show you today is we're going to have this magazine follow the hand. Now you'll notice that I have two magazines here. The reason I have two magazines here is because, well, and we don't speak of the railgun or the nail gun. Oh gosh. Oh yeah. Sorry. Some of the devs from Project Brutality are here and are mentioning dark chapters. Anyways, so the thing is, I have two magazines here, and the idea is that I'm going to have one of them follow the hand and one of them stay on the gun. This one on the gun right here with that little flick up motion is essentially going to be the one that it vanishes in a moment and then is replaced by one that's going to go with the hand. Well, here's the problem. I can move the hand off, right? I can just say, okay, hand, you go over here. We're going to go ahead and just throw in a little pause frame there to sort of indicate that he's grabbing onto it. So again, I'm just going to add the position and rotation keyframes in here. So right here, there's no motion whatsoever. There's nothing getting tweened. And then I'll just have the hand move away. So boop, boop, boop. Goodbye. We're going to adjust that in a bit, but essentially it just comes right back off. In fact, we're going to go ahead and make that take a little bit longer. And you'll notice that if I come in here, you can see that these things always get messed up. This just happens. I mean, there's reasons, but it doesn't really matter. Come in here, click that, it's fixed. Fun, done. And if you need to adjust it, you can, but it gives you a very good starting point. So boom. It's kind of what you would want. In fact, there is one thing I'm going to adjust. This thing isn't going to slow down there. It's going to slow down off camera. So we're going to have this thing just keep moving faster and faster until it gets off camera. You'll also notice that the height of these things really don't matter. I don't care that it's moving 500 pixels a second. I care that the peak is happening somewhere in time. So there it is. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are going to figure out how to get that magazine to follow. The problem, of course, is that the magazine is stuck to the gun. Remember earlier when I was talking about parenting? Well, this is parented to the gun itself. What we need to do now is we need to actually parent the thing to the hand. And in After Effects, you cannot change parent midstream. There's various add-ons that sort of give you workarounds, but they're not quite what they're all workarounds. They're all clunky that I found, at least. Let me not speak for everything. Of course, if someone's out there, I have the perfect workaround. Okay, cool. But what I do is I essentially have two layers, and what I do is I swap which one's visible. So let's see here. If I hit U, okay, the cat literally is on the keyboard. Go over here. Yes, thank you. Sorry. So if I go over here and I hit U, you'll see that one of these things has keyframes and the other one does not. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to really quickly come in here, grab these keyframes, and paste them into the other magazine layer. If you hadn't done this already, you could literally just come in there. Did it not work? Huh. Hold on. Grab, copy. Oops, I didn't actually select this thing. Paste. There we go. All right. So what you could also do if you just want to be sure, you can actually delete the layer that's going to be the duplicate and simply literally duplicate it with Control D again. That way you get the keyframes automatically. Two ways of achieving the same goal. And what's going to happen is the hand's going to come here, and then right here, these two things are going to swap. Right. Here's the issue. one of these things that's parented to the gun will stay here, and it's going to go from being 100% opaque, which is to say visible, to 0. Meanwhile, the other one is not. It's going to go from 0 to 100. But you might notice that right now that doesn't mean anything because it's still not going to go with the hand. But now I am free to actually parent it to the hand at this particular moment in time. It matters when I do that. And when I say when, I don't mean like, in real people time. I mean inside the timeline. If I parent right here, it's gonna be if I parent like the hands down here, the magazines here, if I do the parenting here, it's gonna be the relative positions are gonna be there. But if I bring the timeline indicator out to here, when I parent it at this point in time, it'll be relative in that sense, which is to say being held. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click on this little pick whip is what it's called and drag it to the heavy weapons grip. Click. And now watch what happens. It moves with the hand. And again, like I said earlier, we're going to need an adjustment, and it's because that little thing is peaking. So what we're going to do is we're going to lower that down. I'm even going to move it out a bit further because it felt a little unnatural to me. I'm then going to bring up the background to make sure there isn't any peaking black pixels here. And I see, because the actual magazine itself is very dark black and grays. And if it's set on a black background, you cannot tell it by contrast. And you cannot walk on my stuff. Cat. Oh, okay, fine. You can walk on my stuff. All right. So the idea here is that we basically have this human motion happening. He's grabbing the stuff. It's looking all great. We're just going to have to restore this gun. So this hand moves away. Oops. This hand moves away. So what we're going to do is about right here. I'm going to grab these keyframes, which is the gun itself. I'm going to paste them at this point in time. So in the gun's frame of reference, everything is still here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go roughly the same distance out here. This is if I go back to the very beginning, you'll notice these keyframes represent the very beginning. I'm going to go back out to the end on this, and I'm going to paste them so that it goes back. Then I'm going to come in here. I'm going to stamp down my easing, and we get this. Boop. Very simple, very straightforward. Now, there are a whole bunch of other tips and tricks. I could go on for a couple of hours at this point. But essentially, if you do those same ideas over and over again, you will be able to do things like this. So if I just break this down, this piston right here, all I did was I simply moved it from one spot to the other, and I changed its easing so that it was moving very slow at first and then very fast. And at the same time, I had this little rotating sprite, which is just a little, I guess, the bore, if you will. And then there's the rocket. I just had it sort of like roll in from the side. Again, I just changed its easing, and it gets pushed back in by the piston. Now, there's another parenting thing going on here. So I have this thing moving. It's then parented to the piston, and then boom, just like that thing would happen to the hand. And then it's going to add in another. What I'm doing up here is I am simply doing a sprite replacement. So boom, these things move because they actually didn't move any sprites, but these things just changed, and you can't really notice. Like I said earlier, you're going for good enough. The eye is going to follow certain things. If I sit here and I say those two things don't animate, but the notches do, well, now you notice it. Now you can never unsee it, but whatevs. But yeah, this is just using those exact same principles in combination, and you get all sorts of cool stuff. You get like the weapon respect, where he like moves the thing up and he turns it on and loads in around. Okay, so that is it. We have gone from basically a blank animation with no keyframes to one where he unloads the gun. At this point, there's a couple of other minor details I'll mention, but by and large, understand that this is sort of if this is something you want to do, this is a good beginning of your journey, and there is much more to go. One pitfall that I wanted to mention was the frame rate. So when I go to export this, right? In fact, let me just go ahead and export it. I'll show you the process really quick. So if I go, if I have this thing selected and I hit export, there's a couple of options here. I'm going to go to the render queue, and I'm going to come down here and let me get rid of all the rest of this stuff. These are all items on my render queue that have already rendered, so I don't need them anymore. So this is the animation in question. What I'm going to do is I'm going to edit these things, export these things as PNG. Now I have Galdoc PNG because I basically made my own preset. but effectively, this is a PNG sequence. So for my particular use case, I needed transparent pixels, so I had to go with something that had transparency in it, so I used PNGs. And what this does is it essentially creates a bunch of frames that can then be imported to other engines. Either Unity, you can do so. You can make a sprite sheet if you really want. I don't know how you want to. It depends on what you're trying to do. But effectively, you can take it and do what you need with it. What I ended up doing was I ended up just making a whole bunch of PNGs, and they get pulled into Doom and via very sundry ways that aren't really here nor there. But yeah, so one of the problems I was mentioning was the frame rate is in the actual Doom engine, the weapons animations run at 35 frames per second. The issue I run into here is that when I go to do this, it needs to be at 30 frames per second. And it's a very weird bug. I have never been able to figure it out. When I first started, this was not the case. But essentially, if I try to output, if I go into the actual file here and I go composition settings, this is the actual composition stuff. What's its frame rate, its start time code, duration. These are more for video editors, but you can essentially use it here for just controlling how long the animation is. The thing is that you want this not to be 35 like the Doom engine, but rather 30, because if you do 35, it's going to do interpolations and you're going to get weird flashing as certain layers interpolate over on top of the others. It's a mess. Took me a while to figure that one out. Let's see. I think, let me look at my notes real quick. I think those are the major things I wanted to hit. Um, yeah, that's basically it. So if you have any questions, I'm basically done with what I had to present. If you want to see anything in particular, I've got a couple of really cool like animations here where I have like the revolver. Again, I can like zoom in here. So I redid this recently with motion blur. So this is what it looks like with a little bit of motion blur added. So, it's kind of neat. But yeah, you've got the DMR. So you just flicks open the little thing there. Boop. Fun times. But yeah, that's basically it. So if you got any questions, I am open. And let me see. Oh, yeah, one last slide. If you want to, is it going to go to the last slide? Wrap up. Okay. So contact info, I am Derek Taylor. My email address is galdocmakesstuff@gmail.com. If you want to talk to me on Discord, I am happy to do that too. That's my little taggy tag thing there. My YouTube channel, my Galdoc YouTube channel thing is this. Right now, I've got like a trailer and a bunch of Factorio games. But I'm going to be uploading the entire development of the rocket launcher. So I did it on YouTube. Sorry, I did it on Twitch, and I recorded it for YouTube. So if you want to see the whole process in more detail, covering many more of those little details I was telling you about, then keep an eye out for that. And my Twitch little channel thing is that. And the link for the keyframe wingman is this. I can actually, I think, can I copy this right now? No, I cannot. I'll post this in the actual chat in a second here. But yeah, that's what I got. So, hey, applause! Yay! Woohoo! Thank you. Let me go ahead and post this in here. Boom. Oh, and it's under Animation Composer, by the way. It's called Animation Composer comes with 5 things, one of which is Keyframe Wingman. So, yeah, good times. I'm going to go into the Discord to see if anyone's actually asking there, because that is also a possibility that I'm simply missing. Nope, probably not. So the first thing that got me interested in animations was actually doing my YouTube series, which is the Taylor series on YouTube. So like I said, I'm a math teacher. And that meant I had to learn a whole bunch of different things, including After Effects. And then one day, YouTube decided to show me someone playing Project Brutality. And I was like, whoa, that's Doom. That's amazing. And so I did what any good person who sees something they love and wants to make it better should do, which is to go to the forums and say, hey, here's a whole bunch of ideas to the maker. I'm just kidding. That's what no one should ever do. But that's what I did. And I was like, wow, that's not working. Okay, so if I want these things to exist, I should just learn and do it. And it's pretty funny, like um, just having used After Effects for doing math education stuff, it was, I'll put it this way, the major issue was actually getting through all of the different little pixel art pitfalls that showed up. That was probably the biggest challenge. But it's funny because like the first one that I made was a flare gun. Oh, I had no idea what I was doing back then. It's so good. Let's see. Yeah, it's probably not even. Yeah. Oh wow, that's so old. Okay, missing a whole bunch of files. That's great. Okay. Well, you can't tell what's going on there. I can't start that one off. Darn. But yeah, so I started doing animations, and there's a Discord for Project Brutality, and I started posting them, and they're like, "Hey, you want to start working on some stuff?" And one thing led to another, and here we are. That's basically it.
Very neat. So I haven't seen. Oh, there is a message here.
There's a question. Now he's got a team of folks who make sprites for him to animate. Yes. So mad props to the person who's there saying, I am Carrot Master. He's the person who actually made the sprites for the railgun, by the way. Not the railgun, the rocket launcher we just did. Him and another person called Metal Man. So yeah.
Very cool.
Could not do this without their help.
I was going to ask if folks wanted to, maybe were inspired by your talk and wanted to get started themselves, but didn't have like sprites to work with. Do you have any recommendations of where people can find stuff like that?
That is an interesting question. So it does remind me. I am going to be posting. I do have his permission, by the way. I did ask. I'm going to be posting the rocket launcher sprites in its broken up form. Where is it? It's in my talk. I'm going to be posting a link to that in the Rochester Game Dev. So you'll have access to this file here that has all that stuff. As for the breaking it up into a sort of 3D-ish thing, I'm going to hold on to that because that is actually pretty complicated. And me sort of like just dumping that on someone does almost no good whatsoever. That's one of those things where it actually really pays to sort of trial and error it yourself. Other than that, though, if you're interested in doing stuff and you don't have any sprites, there are various CC0 resources online. I'm not too familiar with too many of them, but like, heck, you could go to, I think it's Realm 667 or whatever, if you want to do Doom sprites. That it's a website that has like a bunch of different weapons that people have made over the years, and you can just sort of download them and you can tinker with them. No one really cares that I know of. I'm sure I just like torqued off about a dozen people in the people out there. Oh no, don't use my thing. But no, and you can use those to sort of just play with and experiment with. Also, there is one major downside to After Effects, and that is it's currently under a monthly charge model, which is something I am trying to get away from. And in fact, After Effects is the only holdout I have. I've essentially found replacements for every other piece of software. So Blender is one of them that I mentioned earlier, but there's also DaVinci Resolve. I am not certain it's going to work, but it's one of the things that I'm looking into because it also has compositing stuff. Although it is a node-based instead of a layered-based compositor. So it just arranges its stuff differently. Don't really need to worry about that right now. Does that answer the question? I'm sorry.
I think so, yeah. All right. It doesn't look like we have a whole lot of questions, so I think we're good to wrap up there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for hosting me on this. This was a lot of fun, and I hope people got a lot out of it.
Thanks so much, Derek.
Sure thing.
Have a good one.
You too.